The first time I saw the car, I was standing in a bank lobby with my laptop open, trying to explain to a teller why my tuition payment had bounced like a bad check. The teller kept saying the same sentence in a polite voice that made it worse. "I am sorry, sir. The account does not have sufficient funds." I refreshed my balance again and again until my thumb cramped. And that is when a text from my sister popped up with a photo of a pearl white Mercedes parked in my parents' driveway and a caption that said, "Guess who finally got what she deserves." I walked out of the bank so fast the security guard watched me like I was about to steal the little pins on the counter, and I just stood on the sidewalk with my stomach flipping, because there was only one place that money could have gone. My college fund was not some vague promise. It was a real account, set up when I was a kid, and my grandparents had fed it like it was a second child. Every birthday, they gave me a card and told me not to waste my brain, and then they would say something about how this is for your future, not for toys. My parents repeated it like a family slogan. Caleb will be taken care of. Caleb will graduate debt-free. Caleb will do something big. I believed them because why would I not? And because every time I asked for proof, my mom would wave her hand and say we have it handled. You worry about school, and my dad would put on his calm voice and say trust us. I did trust them, right up until the moment I watched my balance drop to a number that looked like a typo. I drove straight to their house, still in the same hoodie I wore to the bank, and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel in a way that made the car drift between lanes. So I forced myself to breathe slow like my therapist taught me after my freshman year panic attacks. When I pulled into the driveway, the Mercedes was there, still wearing the temporary tag in the back window, the leather seats visible through the glass like a showroom. My sister Brooke was in the driver's seat with her phone up, filming herself, and she barely glanced at me, which was almost impressive in how cruel it was, like I was just background noise to her big moment. I walked to the front door and went in without knocking because my parents never locked it, and because part of me still had that stupid little kid permission in my head that said this is your home too. My mom was in the kitchen, smiling to herself while she cut strawberries into a bowl like it was a Saturday morning. My dad was at the table scrolling on his tablet, and they both looked up like I was there to visit, like I might hug them and say congratulations. My voice came out thin when I asked where the college account money went, and my mom did not even pretend to be confused. She just sighed like I had spilled something on the carpet. She said, "Caleb, please do not do this today. Brooke is finally happy." I asked her again, slower, and my dad set his tablet down and rubbed his forehead like he was exhausted by me already. He said, "Your sister needed reliable transportation, and you have options. You are smart. You can get loans." The words hit me so hard my ears went hot, and I looked at Brooke, waiting for her to laugh or at least look uncomfortable, but she came in swinging her car keys like a trophy and said, "I told you they would come through for me." I remember this stupid detail that still makes me mad, which is that my dad tried to sound reasonable while he was destroying me. He said we did not drain it, we reallocated it. And then he said something about family priorities shifting, like my education was a calendar appointment that could be moved. I asked how much the car cost, and my mom answered fast, like she had rehearsed it. $81,000 after taxes and the extended warranty, because we are not stupid. I stared at her mouth when she said warranty, because she sounded proud, and I realized she was more worried about the car breaking than she was about me losing school. I told them they had no right, and my mom leaned on the counter and said the account was in our names, and we are the parents, and we did what was best. My chest tightened, and I could feel my pulse in my throat, and I hated that my body was reacting like a trapped animal while they sat there calm. My dad said, "Do not make threats," and I said, "I am not making threats. I am asking you to tell me you did not steal from me." And my sister laughed and said, "Oh my God, you are so dramatic," like I had just complained about sharing a charger. I pulled my phone out and opened my banking app again, turned it toward them, and my dad looked away like he could not bear the sight. My mom finally lost her smile and snapped, "Do you want Brooke to be stuck driving that junker and breaking down on the highway? Do you want your sister to be unsafe?" I wanted to scream that I wanted to not be thrown out of school, that I wanted to eat without counting dollars, that I wanted the one thing they had promised me my whole life. But the only words I could get out were, "You did not even ask me." My dad stood up then, slow, big shoulders. The man who always said he hated conflict, and he said, "We are done talking about this. You will calm down, and you will figure it out, because that is what you always do." Then he pointed at the door like he was dismissing a salesman. and my mom said, "Please leave before you ruin this day for your sister." I looked at Brooke one last time, hoping for something human, a flinch, a crack, anything, and she just leaned against the Mercedes and said, "Thanks for the sacrifice, college boy." When I walked back outside, my vision was blurry, not from tears, from adrenaline, and I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and realized my next tuition deadline was in 9 days. I stared at the Mercedes again, and it hit me that they did not just take money. They took time. They took choices. They took the version of me that believed my own parents would not burn my future for a leather interior. Before I pulled out of the driveway, my phone buzzed with a new notification from the bank, and the subject line said account holder update. And the preview showed one sentence that made my mouth go dry. "Your contact information has been changed per request." That night, I barely slept because every time I closed my eyes I saw the teller's face, calm and apologetic, and I heard my mom saying reallocated like she was moving furniture around. I logged into the account portal again, and my password still worked, which felt wrong, like someone had left a window open after breaking in. My profile showed a new email address I did not recognize and a phone number that was not mine, and under authorized users it listed my parents, plus one more name that punched me in the chest, Brooke Elizabeth Hart. I called the bank fraud line even though I already knew what they would say, and after 40 minutes on hold a guy with a tired voice told me the changes were made in person with valid identification. I asked how Brooke got added, and he said a parent with legal authority can add an adult child as an authorized user if the account structure allows it, and then he suggested I visit a branch with ID to discuss options. I kept my voice steady until the call ended. Then I threw my pillow across the room hard enough to knock over my desk lamp, and I just sat there listening to the buzz of the bulb dying. In the morning I drove to a different branch because I did not want the same teller recognizing me, which is a weird kind of shame, but that is where my brain was. I brought everything: driver license, student ID, the old account statement my grandfather printed for me years ago, and a notebook full of dates. A banker named Denise met me in a glass office and listened without interrupting, and her face did that professional mask thing where you can tell someone has heard worse, but this still annoys them. She pulled up the account history, and I watched her eyes flick across the screen, and then she turned the monitor slightly away like she did not want me to see the details yet. Denise said the withdrawals were not random. They were structured, a series of transfers and a cashier's check, all within 48 hours. I asked who requested the cashier's check, and she said it was issued at a branch near my parents' neighborhood, made payable to a luxury auto dealership about 20 minutes away. I felt my jaw lock so tight it hurt, and I asked if there was any way the bank could reverse it, and she shook her head and said the funds cleared and the transactions were authorized. I told her they were not authorized by me, and she said something that made my skin prickle. The account is listed as a custodial arrangement, and it matured into a joint account years ago, and your parents remained co-owners. I stared at her because I had never agreed to that, at least not in my memory, and Denise slid a document across the desk, a scanned signature page from when I turned 18, and at the bottom was my name in handwriting that looked like mine if you did not look too closely. My stomach dropped because I knew my handwriting, and I knew what it looked like when I was 18, messy, too much pressure, the tail on the Y always sharp. This signature was smoother, slower, like someone had practiced. I told Denise it was forged, and she did not argue. She just nodded once and said if you believe your signature was forged, you will need to file a police report and a formal dispute, but you should understand that will be treated as a criminal allegation against the signers. I left the branch with a folder full of printouts and a headache that felt like someone was squeezing my skull. I sat in my car and stared at the police station address on my phone, and my finger hovered over the directions button like it weighed 100 pounds. I kept thinking about Thanksgiving dinners, about my dad carving the turkey, about my mom posting family photos online with captions about blessings, and I wondered how people pull off betrayal so clean it looks like love from the outside. I did not go to the police station first. I went to my parents again because I needed to see their faces when they realized I was not going to swallow this. My mom answered the door in a robe like she was still in weekend mode, and she glanced at the folder in my hand, and her eyes narrowed. She did not invite me in. She stood in the doorway like she was blocking a stranger, and I hated that it still stung. I told her the bank showed a forged signature from when I turned 18, and she laughed once, quick, mean, and said, "You are accusing your own father of forgery now." My dad came behind her, heard the word forgery, and his face shifted, just a flash. Then he put his calm mask back on and said, "Caleb, you are spiraling, and this is not healthy." I told him the signature was not mine, and he said, "It is your signature. You signed the update paperwork. You were there. You just do not remember because you were always distracted back then." He said it like a fact, like he was correcting a child, and my hands started trembling again. Brooke walked into the hallway behind them, wearing sunglasses inside like she thought it made her look untouchable, and she said, "Are we still on this? Because I have plans." I asked her if she knew she was added to the account, and her smile slipped for half a second. Then she shrugged and said, "Mom said it was easier that way. And anyway, you were never going to appreciate it like I will." I told my dad I was filing a report, and my mom's voice went sharp. "If you do that, you are done here. You will not come back. You will not use our insurance. You will not get help from us ever again." My dad stepped closer and said, "Listen carefully. If you go to the police, you will blow up your entire family, and your grandparents will hear about it. And do you really want to be the reason we all get dragged through court?" That line about my grandparents did something to me, because it was the first time I realized they were scared of more than me being angry. They were scared of being exposed. I asked why they cared what my grandparents thought if they were so sure they were right, and my dad's jaw clenched hard enough that a muscle jumped near his ear. He said, "You are not thinking straight," and he reached for the folder in my hand like he could take it from me. I pulled it back and stepped off the porch, and my mom followed me outside, her robe belt swinging, and she hissed, "You always do this. You always make everything about you." Brooke leaned on the doorframe and called out, "Make sure you do not scratch my car on the way out," and my mom laughed like it was funny, like I was a joke they all agreed on. I got in my car, locked the doors, and before I could start the engine, my dad knocked on the window with 2 firm taps like a cop. He said through the glass, "If you do this, I will tell the school you are unstable. I will tell them you are harassing us, and you will lose everything." The threat was quiet, controlled, and that is what made it terrifying, because it sounded like he had already pictured the story he would tell. I drove away with my heart hammering, and I did not go home. I went straight to campus, to the financial aid office, and I sat across from a woman named Mrs. Richards who looked like she had been hit with every student crisis on earth. I explained what happened without crying, which felt like an achievement, and she said something that made my stomach drop all over again. "If your tuition is not paid by the deadline, you will be dropped from your classes, and your housing contract will be reviewed." I walked out of her office into the hallway full of students laughing about weekend plans, and I realized my parents were not just threatening me. They were already winning, because every hour I spent chasing my stolen money was an hour closer to losing my spot in school. When I got back to my car, there was a new voicemail from an unknown number, and the message was my dad's voice, calm as ever, saying, "I have something to show you. Come home tonight, and bring the folder, because there are things you do not know." I did not go home that night, not because I was brave, but because I was scared I would walk in there and let them talk me down again. Instead, I called the one person in my family who never played referee, my Aunt Marlene, my mom's older sister, the one my parents always described as difficult like it was a medical condition. She picked up on the second ring and said, "Caleb, you sound like you are swallowing glass. Where are you?" Marlene lived 40 minutes away in a small condo near the river, and when I got there she did not hug me or ask me to calm down. She just took the folder, spread the papers out on her kitchen table, and read them like she was preparing for trial. She had this way of going quiet that made you feel like she was building a plan in her head, and I sat there watching her hands. The way she tapped one page twice, the way she circled a date with a pen, the way she breathed through her nose like she was trying not to swear. She said, "Your father is not as clean as he pretends," and I stared at her because I had not expected that. She explained that years ago, when my grandparents started putting money away, it was not because my parents were responsible. It was because my grandfather did not trust them. He set it up so the money would be for me, but he also allowed my parents access for emergencies, and my mom had complained about it for years, saying it made her feel judged. Marlene said she remembered because my mom told her everything back then, like she wanted someone to co-sign her resentment. I asked if Marlene thought my dad forged my signature, and she did not answer right away. She asked me if I ever signed anything for that account when I turned 18, and I said I remembered going to a branch with my dad once, but I thought it was just to add my name. Marlene nodded slowly and said that is the kind of memory that can be bent, because you were trusting and you wanted it to be simple. Then she said if he forged it, He did it because he planned to use the money one day, and he wanted the paperwork to hold. She poured coffee, shoved a mug toward me, and told me to breathe. She said you need two things, proof and time, and you do not have time, so we have to buy it. She called a friend of hers who worked in admissions at a different school, got a quick answer about emergency leave options, and then she told me to email my professors tonight and explain I might need a short extension on assignments because of a family financial crisis. Keep it vague, keep it professional. It was the first time anyone in my family had responded to my panic with action instead of lectures, and I felt this ugly pressure behind my eyes because it made me realize how alone I had been. Then Marlene did something I did not expect. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope with my grandfather's handwriting on it, and she slid it across the table. She said your grandfather gave this to me 2 years ago and told me not to open it unless something happened with your parents and that money. My fingers hovered over the envelope like it might bite me, and I looked at her and asked if she opened it already, and she shook her head and said I kept my word. Inside was a letter, short and blunt, and it felt like hearing my grandfather's voice again, the no-nonsense tone, the way he always got to the point. He wrote that he loved my parents, but he did not trust their judgment when it came to money and favoritism, and he said he had seen them excuse Brooke's choices while praising mine only when it served them. He wrote that if anything happened to the fund, Marlene should help me protect myself, and then he wrote one line that made my throat tighten. I left additional money for Caleb that his parents do not know about, and Marlene has the instructions. I looked up so fast my neck hurt, and Marlene raised her eyebrows like she had been waiting for that moment. She said your grandparents were not dumb, and your grandfather especially was not sentimental about financial control, and he set up a separate trust that transfers when you finish your degree, not when you turn a certain age. She said your parents cannot touch it, and Brooke does not even know it exists. For a second, I felt relief so sharp it almost made me dizzy, and then the anger came back twice as hot, because it meant my parents did this thinking they could get away with it forever. I asked Marlene why she never told me, and she said because your grandfather asked me not to, and because telling you would have made you a target. She leaned forward and said you cannot let them smell that money now, because they will come for it like sharks. We spent the next 2 hours building a plan that made my brain feel like it was finally connected to my spine again. Marlene said step 1, file the police report about the forged signature and unauthorized contact changes, because even if the bank hides behind joint ownership, a forged signature is still a crime. Step 2, contact the dealership and request documentation on how the cashier's check was issued and who signed, because dealerships keep copies of everything. Step 3, use the report and documentation to pressure the bank's internal fraud department to reopen the case, because banks hate liability more than they hate drama. I asked her what about the car, and she said something that made my stomach twist. The car is not just a car, it is an asset purchased with contested funds, and if your parents financed any part of it or lied on paperwork, that is another trail. I could not tell if she was trying to comfort me or warning me, because her voice stayed flat, but her eyes were sharp. The next morning we went to the police station together, and even though I was an adult, having her next to me made me feel less like I was about to betray my own blood and more like I was about to report a crime, which is what it was. The officer at the desk listened, took my statement, asked me if I was sure about accusing my parents, and I said yes in a voice that surprised me with how steady it sounded. When he handed me the report number, my hands were still shaking, but it was a different shake, not helpless, more like my body was catching up to my decision. On the way out, Marlene's phone rang, and she answered on speaker without thinking, and I heard my mom's voice come through loud and sweet like she was calling about brunch plans. She said, Marlene, I need you to stop filling Caleb's head with nonsense. And Marlene did not even greet her. She just said you stole from him, and now you are scared, so do not pretend this is about family harmony. My mom's voice dropped, and she said you always hated us, you always wanted to break us apart. Marlene said calmly, no, I always hated the way you treat your son like a backup plan, and then she hung up. I sat in the passenger seat staring at the dashboard because my hands were clenched so tight my knuckles hurt, and I realized my mother had known exactly where I was, which meant someone had been tracking me through that account change, or through my phone, or through something I had not considered. When we got back to Marlene's condo, there was a brown envelope taped to her door, no stamp, no return address, just my name written in my dad's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the forged signature page, and beneath it, in pen, were 6 words that made my stomach turn cold. Stop this, or you will regret it. That is the moment I stopped thinking about this as a family fight and started thinking about it as a threat, and my body reacted before my brain did, because my mouth went dry and my hands started tingling like I was about to faint. Marlene read the note, rolled her eyes like my dad was a predictable problem, and said, "Good. Now we know he is scared enough to get sloppy." I wanted to borrow her confidence and wear it like armor, but all I could think about was how my dad had always been the one who told me to be careful, to not trust people, to lock my doors, and now he was the one taping warnings to a door. We moved faster after that. Marlene called the bank's fraud department with the police report number and demanded escalation. And when they tried to stonewall her with policy language, she calmly said, "You have a forged document in your file and a police report that says so. And if you do not respond, I will have an attorney request your surveillance footage." That changed the tone fast. They gave us a case manager, and they asked for time, and Marlene said, "You have 48 hours, because my nephew has a tuition deadline." I called the dealership from my car outside campus because I could not do it in a quiet place. I needed the hum of traffic, so I would not lose it. I asked for the finance manager, told him I needed copies of purchase paperwork tied to a cashier's check from my account, and he tried to brush me off until I mentioned a police report. Then he got careful and said he could not release documents without the purchaser's consent, and I said fine. Then tell me whose name is on the title. He hesitated, and that hesitation felt like oxygen, because it told me there was something there. He said the title is in Brooke's name, but the purchaser listed on the paperwork is my father, and the down payment came from the cashier's check, and the rest was financed through a loan. My throat tightened because I had not expected financing, not with my dad's pride, and I asked whose credit was used for that loan. The finance manager said I should direct any legal requests through corporate, and he ended the call with a rehearsed goodbye. Marlene and I sat at her table again, and she wrote down what we knew like we were building a map. If my dad financed part of the car, he had a loan tied to it, and if the bank account had been drained to create a big down payment, that meant he wanted the monthly payment low enough to manage. It also meant he might have lied about income or debt to qualify, because my parents were not rich, they just acted like it when it made them look good. That evening I got an email from the bank's case manager that made my skin crawl. She wrote that they had reviewed the signature file and would like to meet with me in person to discuss discrepancies, and attached was a new copy of the document, clearer than the one Denise had shown me. And on the second page was something I had not seen before, a notary block with the name of a notary public and a date stamp. Marlene leaned in, squinted, and said, "I know that name." She got up, went to her bookshelf, pulled a folder, and flipped through old paperwork like she had been waiting for this moment for years. She pointed at a name on a different document, the same notary name, and said this notary was used in your parents' refinancing paperwork 3 years ago, and my mother complained to me that she had to rush to some guy's office after hours because your father refused to miss a meeting. The notary was not a random bank employee. It was someone my dad had used before, which meant this was not an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a system. Marlene said we are going to that notary tomorrow, and I felt my stomach drop because the idea of confronting a stranger about my father's forgery felt surreal, like a movie, except this was my life and my tuition clock was ticking. We found the notary's office in a strip mall between a tax prep place and a vape store. The sign on the door said Mobile Notary Services, Walk-ins welcome, and inside it smelled like cheap air freshener trying to hide old carpet. A man in his late 50s looked up from a computer and smiled like we were customers, and Marlene introduced herself without emotion and asked if he remembered notarizing a signature for Caleb Hart on a bank custodial conversion document 6 years ago. The man squinted at me, then at the date, then at the name, and he said he could check his log, because notaries keep a record. He pulled out a thick binder, flipped pages, and his finger paused. His face changed, small, almost invisible, but I saw it. He said yes, I notarized that, and Marlene asked where it took place. He said at the Hart residence, after hours, and my stomach clenched because I remembered that night now, not the paperwork, but the mood, my dad rushing me through dinner, my mom telling me to just sign, my dad saying it was boring adult stuff. Marlene asked the notary if he saw me sign it. The man hesitated and said I verify identification, and Marlene leaned in and said that was not my question. The man swallowed and said, "Your father handed me the document already signed, and he told me you were upstairs studying, and that you had signed earlier, and he said it was fine, and I should just stamp because he was in a hurry." I felt heat rush up my neck so fast I thought I might throw up, and my hands clenched into fists at my sides because my body needed something to hold on to. Marlene asked him if he understood what he just admitted, and he started talking faster, saying it was years ago. He did not think. The father seemed trustworthy, and Marlene cut him off and said, "You notarized a signature without witnessing it, and now you are going to write a statement, because there is a police report and there will be subpoenas, and you can decide right now if you want to cooperate." The notary's hands were shaking when he picked up a pen. I watched him write that he did not witness my signature, and that my father presented the document already signed, and that my ID was not present, and each word felt like a door slamming shut on the version of my father I used to defend in my head. When we walked out with the statement, I sat in the car and stared at the steering wheel until my vision blurred, and I whispered, "He did it." Like saying it out loud made it real in a new way. We sent the statement to the bank case manager and to the detective handling my report, and within hours my dad started calling. He called 5 times in a row, then my mom, then Brooke, and I did not answer any of them because I was scared of what I would do if I heard their voices. Then an unknown number texted me a photo of my dorm building from across the street, and the message said, "We can talk the easy way or the hard way." I showed Marlene the text, and she did not flinch, but her jaw tightened in a way that told me she was furious. She said, "Do not go back to your dorm alone tonight," and she called the detective and forwarded the message and the photo. The detective asked if I recognized the number, and I said no. And he said, "Stay where you are, because intimidation tied to an open report is a separate issue." And that was the first time I heard an adult authority figure say the quiet part out loud. Your parents are not just being selfish, they are committing crimes. The next day, the bank froze the remaining linked access on the account pending investigation, which was almost funny because there was nothing left to freeze, but it mattered in principle. The case manager called me and said the notary statement changed everything, and they were referring the matter to their legal department, and they would be cooperating with law enforcement. She said she could not promise reimbursement because of the joint ownership structure, but she said the bank would evaluate liability regarding the forged conversion document. I hung up and sat there breathing like I had just run a race, and Marlene put her hand on my shoulder once, quick, then pulled it back like she was not used to comforting people. Tuition was still due. Marlene fronted my payment on her credit card, which made me feel sick with gratitude and guilt, but she shut that down fast and said, "You will pay me back when you can, and you will finish school, and that is the whole point." I signed the payment confirmation on my laptop with my hands shaking, and when the receipt email arrived, I stared at it like it was proof I still existed. 3 days later, my dad showed up on Marlene's doorstep with my mom and Brooke, and the sight of them together made my stomach twist because it looked like an intervention, like they were about to diagnose me as the problem. My dad held his hands up like he was a peacekeeper and said, "We need to talk like adults." And Marlene stepped outside and said, "You forfeited that tone when you forged your son's signature." Brooke stood behind them with her arms crossed, lips tight, like she was still trying to act above it, but her eyes kept flicking toward the street like she was worried someone was watching. My dad said, "Caleb, look at me," and I did, and I hated that part of me still wanted him to say he was sorry in a way that meant something. Instead, he said, "We can fix this privately. You do not need to involve police. You do not need to involve the bank. You are making this bigger than it needs to be." Marlene said, "You are not here to fix it. You are here because you are scared of consequences." And my mom snapped that Marlene was poisoning me, that she always wanted to steal me away from my family, which was so ridiculous it almost made me laugh. Then Brooke finally spoke, and her voice was different, less smug, more brittle, and she asked, "Wait, what do you mean forged? Because Mom said you agreed. Mom said you were fine with helping me." My mom's face froze for half a second, and my dad's eyes flashed with anger at Brooke like she had broken script. I looked at my sister and said I found out when my tuition bounced, and Brooke's mouth fell open just a little, and she said, "They told me you were on a scholarship. They told me you did not need the money." My mom jumped in fast, saying that is not what we said, do not twist it, but Brooke's face was changing as the lie hit her, piece by piece. She looked at my dad and said, "You said Caleb would be fine. You said this was just moving money around." And my dad barked, "Not now, Brooke." And that was the first time I had ever heard him talk to her the way he talked to me. Brooke took a step back like she had been slapped. Then she looked at me and said, "Are you serious? You are calling the cops on Mom and Dad over a car?" And I said, "No, I am calling the cops because they forged my signature and stole my future, and the car is just the receipt." My dad's face went cold, and he said, "If you keep pushing, you will destroy your mother." And Marlene laughed once, sharp, and said he is the one who destroyed her when he decided his son was an acceptable victim. The detective pulled up in a cruiser while we were still standing there, because Marlene had called about the intimidation text and gave them my location. My mom saw the cruiser, and her face crumpled like she had not expected real consequences to show up at the curb. The detective asked my dad for identification and asked him about the forged document, and my dad tried to use his calm dad voice, but it sounded weak in front of a uniform. Brooke started crying, messy, loud, and she kept saying, "I did not know, I did not know," and my mom tried to pull her into a hug, but Brooke pushed her away. I wish I could tell you that moment felt like victory, but it did not. It felt like watching a building collapse while you were still standing inside the dust. The detective did not arrest anyone on the spot, because that is not how it works most of the time, but he did take statements, and he did warn my dad about contact and intimidation, and he did say the notary's statement was serious. My parents left in silence, and Brooke did not take the Mercedes. She walked down the sidewalk to Marlene's parking lot and sat on the curb with her head in her hands like the car had suddenly become heavy. 2 weeks later, the bank offered a partial reimbursement tied to the forged conversion paperwork, not because they were kind, because they saw risk. It was not the full amount, but it was enough to stabilize me for the semester without taking out the worst kind of loans. The detective said the case was still open, and my dad's attorney contacted Marlene with a proposal, repayment over time in exchange for dropping the criminal angle, and Marlene told them no without blinking. Brooke returned the Mercedes to the dealership on her own, not because she became noble, but because she could not stand driving it once she knew it was bought with a lie she did not consent to. She got a cheaper car, a normal car, and she stopped talking to my parents for a while. Then she started talking to them again in that cautious way people do when they're trying to rebuild, but still do not trust the floor. She apologized to me one night in a text that was too long and too messy to feel rehearsed, and I believed she meant it. But I also knew she would always be my parents' favorite in a way that did not fully depend on her choices. My relationship with my parents did not get repaired. My dad sent one email that was half apology, half blame, saying he never meant to hurt me. He just needed to protect the family. And I read it 3 times trying to find the part where he admitted he chose Brooke over me, and it never showed up. My mom posted vague Facebook quotes about ungrateful children and betrayal, and people I barely knew messaged me asking if everything was okay, and I did not answer them because I did not want to live my trauma out loud for strangers, even though that is basically what I am doing right now. Here is the part that sits in my chest on quiet nights. I did not feel like a hero when I pushed back. I felt like a kid filing paperwork against the people who taught him to ride a bike. I also felt something else, something that has not gone away, which is the weird clarity that love without respect is just a leash. I can still miss my parents and still keep them out of my life, and that is a sentence I never thought I would be capable of writing. I am finishing my degree. The separate trust my grandfather set up will transfer when I graduate if nothing changes, and Marlene keeps reminding me that I cannot let guilt unlock doors I fought to close. Sometimes I wonder if my dad will ever look at what he did without wrapping it in excuses about family, and sometimes I wonder if I even want that, because closure from someone who can justify forgery might be another trap. For now, I keep my head down. I go to class, I work my campus job, and when my phone lights up with my mom's name, I watch it ring until it stops, because the easiest way is always the one that costs me the most.